Hello. I thought it might be interesting to talk about and demonstrate the SMTPD filters protocol. I've seen a few filters in C, in Go, even in shell script and awk, but none in Ruby. So that's what I'm going to do today. I want to write a filter that will rewrite the subject line of any mail that comes through the server. Uh, Not particularly complicated, but I think it will be instructive nonetheless. First things first, let us check out the man pages. And you can see SMTBD filters are programs that run as unique standalone processes. They read events and filter requests from standard input, writing responses to standard output, and logging to standard error. Pretty straightforward. They're not allowed to terminate, and SMTBD filters must not use blocking IO. They must answer asynchronously to SMTPD. Okay, so there's one problem with that. For Ruby, the functions for reading and writing to standard input and standard output are blocking. So we're going to have to write our own if we're going to use Ruby. And then we can see here there are two different streams called report and filter. The report stream is a one-way stream, and it's just saying, hey, this thing happened, react to it how you will. And then the filter stream is a two-way stream. It says, hey, this thing happened. What do you want me to do with that? You want me to continue? Do you want me to reject the connection? So on and so forth. And I think that's pretty straightforward. And here's the protocol. You can see it starts with a handshake. It spits these lines out into standard output. And then our filter needs to read all that and then respond with whichever filters that we're going to be using. So in this example, it's going to be reading from the report stream, looking for the link connect event. And then it tells SMTPD that they're ready. And then, you can just look at all this, but I think it's pretty straightforward. Oh, I forgot. There is a little bit of a hiccup. So, if we go to the filter requests, we can see that we need to respond in this way, in this format, filter result with this is the session ID, and then this is the unique token. And then here's our response. It could be proceed, reject with the message, or something else. That's true for most filters, except for the data line filter. In that case, we see that filters come in as multiple lines that terminate in this little dot here. And then we need to respond with the filter data line response here with the session ID and the token. And we just send however many lines we want to respond with. And then we also terminate with a dot. And you can see that there are different payloads for different events. Connect has this payload RDNS, SCRDNS, source, and destination. Each event won't necessarily have the same number of payloads. And then here we can see, uh, oh, here we go. There are the decisions we can send back or respond with. Proceed, just continue on. And then junk, I think, adds like an X spam header to the message. Rejects, just rejects it out of hand, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the first thing I should think about is how am I going to test my filter? It's pretty straightforward. They said in the design section. The filter needs to read from standard input, output to standard output, and then log errors to standard error. So what I can do is just have a text file of payloads and then just say, I believe this was the payload that, let me actually just SMTPD filters. Here we go. I'm going to ignore these first three lines, but we do need config ready, and then we respond with whatever filters we want, and then we respond finally with register ready. Also, something we need to do is I don't want this to be error prone, so I want to check to make sure if I go down here, what am I looking for? Okay, report and filter, and then during the initial handshake, let's see. Each report event is generated by SMTPD as a single line similar to the one below. The format consists of a protocol prefix containing the stream, the protocol version, the timestamp, the subsystem, and the event and the unique session identifier separated by the pipe. Okay, so I guess we want to check the instance that there aren't enough arguments being passed in. So let's go ahead and do stream version timestamp and then smtp in is the only subsystem. And then let's go ahead and put in link connect as the event. And we can see it's missing the session. So we want this to return an error. And then likewise, we want to test to make sure that the stream is correct. There should only be two streams, report and filter. And so this should return an error. And then we pass in a session ID and then a payload. And then we can go ahead and put in real data. So report version timestamp smtp in link connect session, and then I think this is rdns fcrdns source and dest. And then if we want the link disconnect, and then we can clear this all out. So we also want to test the filter stream smtp in, and then the connect event, which will have a session and a token. Let's actually check that. Okay, this one will have a session, a token, RDNS, FCRDNS, source and destination. And then we also want to test data line because we want to filter out the subject. And that just has lines. So I think we can just copy this and say data line session token. And then this is, let's say, subject, test subject. And then we can also put in other stuff like line 1 and then period, maybe more, line 2. And then we also want to make sure that only the subject header is filtered out. We don't want the case where inside the body of the email, there could be like, this is a message. We don't want our filter to affect this line. We only want it to affect this line. Typically, the way mail messages work is that the headers of the mail message come in first and then followed by the body of the message. And I think that is it. So we can see if we do cat payloads, it spits this out. And then we just need to pipe this in to our filter. So let's write a sort of filter subject script. This will be a shell script. And then this script is going to be run by smtpd. And while it will be run as my user and my user group, I'm not really sure what environment variables are going to be present. So rather than just guess, I'm just going to wipe out all the environment variables and then just pass in the ones that I want. Similar to the ones where I did in my run it video. So we're just going to use this in here. And then we're going to change this to Ruby, home, Joseph, workspace, filter subject, filter subject.rb. And we'll make it a little bit simpler, just filter.rb. And then, yeah, that should be okay. But something we need is the Ruby path. So we need to add that to our path. So let's say path, home, Joseph, local share rubies ruby 3.1.2 bin and then the path. So let's chmod that to, and let's see what happens when I do that. Oh right, I need to, let's say filter.rb. If we cat the payloads and pipe it into filter subject, nothing happens, which is what we expected. Okay, so let's open up our filter.rb. And this is our Ruby file. And something we need to do, let's just get this off the ground. First, we need to implement non-blocking IO. So we just need an infinite loop, loop do end. And then we want to read whatever input is coming in through standard input. And then I guess we'll write whatever's coming in into standard output. So to do this first thing, let's declare a class called read. And then we'll initialize it with whatever file descriptors we have. So if we look at, let's say man std in, we can see that std in, std out, std error are basically just file descriptor files. They're basically treated as files according to the system. So you could use this class for other files, like just normal everyday files. Of course, we're going to be using it for standard input, but you could use it for anything. And then we're going to declare a variable and use the Ruby IO library to declare this new instance of IO. So we pass in the file descriptor and we just want to read. And then you can see we use call and we set the buffer to an empty string. And then we just loop through and read a single character using the read non-block method on IO. And then I'd like to do exception false. Now, you may be wondering, why do I do this? I could just do this and then I guess rescue, right? And then determine what to do based on which exception has been raised. But I find that this kind of obfuscates what's going on. And also, it decouples the throwing of an error and the handling of an error. Like you could have multiple lines here, blah, foo, bar, and then you have to rescue each individual exception, uh, like so or something. Or maybe it's this way. I don't know. You have to determine, okay, if this exception was thrown or raised, what do I do? And you don't really know, hey, which line from here did that? So rather than deal with that, I like to couple the exception handling with where it was raised. And so basically, when I do non-blocking IO, I don't raise exceptions. Instead, what is returned is a nil if it reaches the end of the file. So I'm going to return EOF if character is nil. And it also returns back the symbol wait readable. So if character is wait readable, what do we do? Well, what I do is continue on to the next iteration of the loop. And then I do io.select. And then basically what this does is wait until this file or IO stream becomes readable again. And then we add the character to the buffer and then return the buffer if the character equals the end of the new line character. And that's pretty much it for reading, at least. And then if the line is end of file, we need to handle that case. So break if line equals end of file. And then we're passing it into this write class. So we need to write that. And here it's pretty much the same. We initialize with our file descriptor. We set our IO stream. And this time we want to write that stream. And then we do def call and we're passing in a line. And then we do a loop. And then we do result equals IO dot write non-block the buffer. And then we're also doing exception false. And then this is pretty much the same here. We wait if we return back that the result is wait writable now. But so the way this io.select method works is that you pass in first your readable streams. We're not going to wait on any readable streams. And then your writable streams. And then I think your standard error streams. I'd have to look that up again. And then we're done. What's returned here is the number of bytes that were written to the stream. So if result is greater than equal to the buffer dot size. Oh, actually, buffer equals line. Buffer dot size. And then if we didn't write everything, we do buffer dot slice. And we just slice off however many bytes was actually written. And then we continue on to the loop. And so this should give us just a cat. Basically, we're just repeating what is passed into standard input. I forgot. I need to actually declare this. So read.new, and then we can pass in the standard input file number. Same with write. And we can also do write error. We're not using it right now, but we can pass in standard error. And then we have that available to us to use in a future case. So let's try this again. And you can see, yeah, basically it just read what was coming in through cat payloads and then just output that. But we don't want this. We want to output very specific things. So let's go back to our filter.rb. What I've done here is write the classes directly into the file, but we want to have some sort of organization. Otherwise, this file could quickly become unreadable because of how large it is. So what I usually do is I make a lib directory. And then I also do libdir file.expand path, the lib directory, and then the current directory. Actually, I can just ruby filter.rb. And basically, you can see that's just the lib directory. And what I want to do with that lib directory is put it into my load path. Unshift lib dir. What that will do is that when I do require, like say read and write, it will look in the lib directory for a file called read.rb or write.rb. And then I can just pass this in or copy, paste, and then write.rb. Do the same thing here. And now it's much cleaner. And let's say cat payloads, pipe that into dot filter. And it seems to work. All right. So the first thing we want to do, if we look back at our smtpd-filters man page, is we want to implement this handshake. SMTPD will output these 4 lines, and then once this line has been output to us, read through from standard input, we need to register each filter or stream or whatever, an event that we want to listen to. And then finally, when we're ready, we output register ready. So what I'm going to do here is, I guess I'll just put a class called config. And we're going to have a method called call with the variable of line. Something we need to understand is that line will have the new line character at the very end. So let's strip out any white space. And then these lines are passed in, but we basically just want to ignore them until config ready is passed in. So let's return false if line is not equal to config ready. And the reason I'm doing that is if you look at this loop, this whole protocol is basically 2 loops. Okay, so one loop is for the config handshake. And then the second loop is for reading stream events like report or filter. So we're not going to do this loop yet. but we will do it soon. So that's why I've commented that out. And then I guess we want to do config.line here. And then let's actually declare a new config and pass in the right instance. So we need to def self.build, and we pass in right. We declare a new instance, return that instance, and we set the instances right equal right. And also what we're going to need is the attr accessor. Once we do receive config ready, we can print. So I want to define a print method here. I want to pass in any args because I want to use the smtpd-filters command. And so that basically just assigns it to this line, and then we write that line. So what am I printing? I'm printing, so sprintf, you can set like a string, and then you can do %s. The next variable that you pass in will be placed inside here. So I want to do register ready. And I also need a new line character because this one doesn't do that automatically. And then I want to return true. So let's see, go to workspace, filter subject, cat payloads, pipe that into filter subject. Ooh, there's an undefined local variable of or method line for config. All right, I need to clean that up a little bit. And then we can see, okay, it printed out register ready, which is what we expect. It's not everything that we expect, of course. We still need to print out this line or whatever filter stream/events that we're listening to. But, we're taking it one step at a time. We're iterating through. And here, I think I want this to be within the module namespace filter. And then set that. Let's also go ahead and go to lib, write a directory for filter, and then config.rb. And then just slot that in here. And then we need to require that. Require filter config. And then let's test that again to see if I didn't break anything. Oops, I did break something. This should now be filter config. There we go. All right. Something I need to do here also. So if we activate this loop, if we reach the end of line while we're doing this config handshake, that means we didn't yet print out config or register ready. So we don't want to break here because if we break here, then this loop will be executed. So actually we want to exit with, and I'm saying exit 1 because I want to exit with the error code of 1. If you're working with shell scripts, when you exit with 0, that indicates that the program was successful. If you exit with any non-zero code, that indicates that there was an error of some sort, and then you can inspect or like troubleshoot which error code that was. So let's go ahead and try that. You can say echo $? That will tell you which error code was returned. Actually, let's go ahead and let's try that again. Oh, right, I see. So this is basically what I haven't done here is, let's go back to config. You can see here I put the structure in place to determine whether we need to continue listening to filter config or not, but I didn't actually do anything with it because there's nothing here to check the result. So if the result is true, we break from this loop. If it's false, then we haven't yet reached config ready, so we just continue with the loop. And now that should tell us, let's comment this out and try that again. And we can see that the exit code now is 0 because we've completed the config handshake. and then we exit. And then if we update the payloads, say, actually, you know what? I won't update the payloads. I will create a new payload config. So let's rename that to payload without config. And so we removed the payload without config there. So what should happen is that we reach the end of the file. And then since we reached the end of the file within this loop, we have to exit with error code 1. So that's what should happen. Yeah, okay, without config. And then we echo the result code, which is 1. Okay, and then we can uncomment out this loop. And we basically just want to do similar things. But instead of exiting here, we don't really care if we reach the end of the file in this loop. So we just break from here. And then once we break from this loop, the next line that will most likely be executed is exit 0. And then let's just write a filter, build, and I want to pass in the config, but I also want to pass in write and write error because I want to be able to write to standard output and also to standard error. So I can then pass in filter.call, whatever line has been read from standard input. And then this filter class will output whatever needs to be output. And then the API I want to conform to is that when I register a filter, so if I say filter.register filter and then the connect event, I want to be able to have this handler respond to the method call. So basically, you can do that with handler equals lambda do whatever the payload is. I'll get to that later. And then for now, I just want to do something simple and just reject everything that tries to connect. So 550, no entry. So I need to build this filter class and this build method as well as this register filter method. And then I need to make it so that this config handshake returns the register line. And then I need to make it so that if a certain line is passed in and we have registered this filter for, like, say, the connect event, that it returns the appropriate response. Okay, that's a lot, but let's just take it one at a time. For now, let's go ahead and go to lib and write a filter.rb file. Let's go class filter. Actually, I need to go back here and change this to class because if this was module, this would collide with class, and so we don't want that. And then let's see. Let's do this for config, write, and then write error. Self.build, we pass in config, write, and write error. Basically the same thing. Return instance. Okay, and then we have a method call that we pass into line with. We also need to strip out the white space. Then we'll just leave this right now as it is because I want to implement the def register filter method. We have a register filter. We will probably also have register report, but not right now. So let's put the event and then the event handler. Now you may be wondering why I don't, like, say, have like def register stream event, and then we have the stream, and stream can be either report or filter, and then the event, and then the event handler, and then have like a part where we check if stream equals report, and then else if stream equals filter, and then go on from there. Well, in my mind, this is a very clear example of breaking the tell, don't ask principle. And what that means is we already know what we want to do. Yeah, we could write filter.register stream event, filter connect handler. But the thing is that we already know that we want to register a filter that listens to connect events with this handler. We don't need to then go into this method here and query, hey, what stream am I and what behavior do I need to implement for reports specifically and then filters. And then, of course, we need to implement stuff for events equals data line because I think those are different, right? So we don't need to do that if we already know at the time of construction what we need to do. This is what tell don't ask is. So when this is passed in, we need to print this line. So we do need to pass that into the config file or the config class. Let's do that. We can have a method called register stream event with stream and event. And then we'll just have an array of stream events and we pass in stream and event. And we need to initialize that. And then when we get the line config ready, we can print for each stream event. We can print register, and then we look at the payload here or what they're expecting. They need to know the stream and they need to know the event. So that's one string, smtp in, and that's the other string with a new line, and then we pass in stream and event. So let's test that out. Ooh, okay, I don't have a build method for filter here. Or actually, I haven't required filter. Let's try that again. Oh, okay. Let me see. I need to do the correct payload. Let's see. Oh, it's payloads. Okay, sorry. Register ready. It's still not printing that out. That is because when we register this filter, we're not letting config know that this filter exists. So let's go ahead and define a register stream event similar to the one that is in config. And like the one in config, we do stream event, and then we'll also pass an event handler. And here we also want to have our own array of handlers. And then here, let's put that in there. Stream event handler. And then for config, we do register stream event with the stream and event. Let's try that. Okay, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. Oh, okay, because I haven't done anything here. All right, let's register stream event filter and then the event and then the event handler. This is not actually what we want to pass in because if you see here, we're just returning a payload. So we need to actually have some other handler that takes the payload and then prints out the exact thing that we want. And I will call that, I guess, send filter response, pass in the event handler, and also a write class because I don't want to generate new write classes willy-nilly. I just want to pass in the ones that I already have. But we don't want to code that right now, so I'll just comment that out and we just know that I'm going to fill that in later. So we just pass in event handler, and then we register that with the config, and then we register that into our own handlers. So as you can see, we are now registering SMTP in, filter, connect. Everything looks good there. Now we just need to respond to that payload, which is right here. Before we do that, I think we want to also handle any errors that come our way. Let's clean this up, close this, leave that open. Okay, so what we get here, if we look at the payloads, is pipe delimited line of different things. And we need some way to separate this line into different parts. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, go back here, declare something to atomize the line, and then add instance.atom equals atom.new. And then we need to set that here. Okay, and then we pass the line into the atom class, and then we receive a payload back. Let's see, and then we go here and declare the atom.rb file. I want to basically copy this and say atom. There we go. I don't need a write class, so I don't need to initialize anything or build anything. I just need to call, and then I can delete this stuff too. So this line is pipe delimited. There is no new line that I have to worry about. So I can basically just split this line based on the pipe character. And then looking at the first error, if there's anything less than 6 parts, I will return a symbol called missing atoms with length is less than 6. And then we can destructure this. So basically, when you split something like this, it returns back an array. And we can destructure the array using the star operator. So like say stream, I don't care about version or timestamp or subsystem. And then event, session ID, and then payload. This equals atoms. So this star is destructuring this array into constituent parts. And then this star here is converting whatever's back in here into an array. I believe. I might be wrong. Anyway, we'll see. We'll test this out. And then we want to return invalid stream. Like if we go back to our payloads, if we get anything other than report or filter, we want to return back an error. So invalid stream if not report filter include stream. Okay, and then we need to handle those errors. So we receive back a payload from the atom class. If payload equals missing atoms, then we'll handle that and return. And then if payload equals invalid stream, we'll handle that and return. Is there a print? No, there's not. Okay, so we need to copy this method here and add it to the end. But we'll also add a warning method, and we'll do write error. Okay, so here we will warn, whoopsie, missing atoms, %s, new line, and then we'll just pass in the line. And the same with stream, invalid stream. So if we test this, we get back missing atoms. Oh, there's a lot of white space here. So let me just delete those so that we don't get a bunch of noisy stuff. So yeah, we get back missing atoms. This is missing atoms, and then this is an invalid stream. All right, so we have some error handling here. Now we need to return back the actual payload that we're going to use. And basically, if stream equals report, then we return one payload. And then we turn back the default payload, which is, I'm going to say is the filter payload. And then we pass in stream, event, session ID, and we need token. So the way token works is report doesn't pass in token. can see it's just the session ID here. There's no token. There's just the payload for this particular event link connect. But filter is different. I go down here. Filter requests are different. They have a session ID, a token, and then the payload. So we can get that by saying, let's destructure this again from payload. And then that's where we get this. And then you want to handle the case for event line too. So event equals data line. Let's return back filter data line payload new stream event session ID token, and then whatever the payload is. For a report, let's say if stream equals report, we'll return back the report payload dot new stream event session ID and payload. And then here's the thing. I'm going to need the link connect. I mean, I don't need all this. I just want to do this to show. So if stream equals report and event equals link connect, return back report link connect payload stream event session ID, and then destructure that payload. Okay, so where are these coming from? It doesn't actually need to be that complicated. What I usually do is I use structs. So let's define our report, actually. Report payload equals a struct dot new, and we accept the arguments for stream, event, session ID, and payload. And then similarly, report link connect payload has stream, event, session ID, but it doesn't have payload. It has RDNS. If we go back here, we can see link connect has RDNS, FCRDNS, source and destination. So RDNS, FCRDNS, source and dest. And then let's copy this again. This is our filter payload, and basically we just want the token. Yeah. And then let's copy this once more. This is the filter data line payload. We want the token, but we also want the line. And so we're using different payload structures because, for each event, they're different. We don't want to be constrained, and we need to know, okay, the third argument is the session ID. And then for different events, we need to have different payloads. Like here for link greeting, it would be host name. For link identify, it would be method identify. We want to have different payloads for different stream/event pairs so that we are not confused later on down the line. Okay, so once we have that, we have our payload. So for each handler, we want to select stream event and then handler. We want to select whether the stream equals the payload dot stream and the event equals the payload dot event. So we have a bunch of handlers here, right? We've been registering filters for that, but we don't want to run every single handler on every single line. We just want to run whichever handlers are there for this stream and this event. And then we do each do. That will pass in stream, event, but we don't care about those anymore. And then handler. And then we just pass in handler dot payload. Okay. So here is where we come back to this. From this API, we have a handler that responds to .call. and it's basically just rejecting out of hand every single thing that connects to this SMTPD server. But this is not the output that needs to be sent back, right? So if we go to filter requests, you can see it's expecting this output. So it's expecting filter result, the session here, then the token, and then the whatever decision was made. So what we need to do is create a new class, send filter response to RB. Let's copy this, send filter response. I'm going to need to have the filter itself, the filter handler, and then the write class. So self.build filter and write instance equals new, return the instance, and then set the filter equal to filter, writer equal to writer, or actually write. And then we call, and so we get the result from the filter that we passed in this payload. And then we print filter result, and then a string, and then another string, and then another string, and then a new line. And then we pass in payload.session ID, payload.token, and then the result. So if we test this, oh, okay. We don't have a print here. So let's just copy that. Okay. And then we can, it should, oh, I know why. First of all, we need to set this, we need to require that file send filter response. And then here, we need to actually save this here. So handler equals send filter response dot build, passing in the handler, which is used as the filter, and then write. So we need to update that. And then, I don't know, will this work? We'll see. Oh, it works. So we get a filter result with the session and the token, and then our response, which is reject 550, no entry. Okay, so we have a basic structure, but again, remember the whole point of this is to filter the subject, not just filter one specific event. So let's clean this up a little bit. Let's see. This is probably good. This is probably good. Okay, so I want to filter the subject. And if we look at the payloads again, let's see, payloads, we can see that there are many different lines. What we want to do is only filter the subject. The headers of a mail message usually come first in the document. And then anything after that is, actually, we probably want this as well, an empty line. Anything that precedes the headers are the body of the message. And we do not want to modify this line. We want to modify this line to read something like subject filtered, something like that. But we don't want to modify this line. And so we can't really do this here. Okay. Like basically go line by line and say, hey, does this match this subject colon, and then we'll yada, yada, yada. Because if we do that, then this line will also be filtered as well. And we don't want to do that. So we have to implement some sort of session handling kind of thing. And the way I've seen it done is that you take the link connect report to create a session, and then the link disconnect report to delete that session. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new method called register data line filter. And then we'll pass in the filter because we don't need anything else. We don't need event. We already know that the event is data line, and so on and so forth. And then we just register the stream event, filter, data line. And then we pass in, similar to this, we pass in a data line class with the filter itself, and then the right instance. And then let's go ahead and write that underscore line to RB. This is pretty similar. Yeah, we'll just keep all this except for this stuff. And then when we register a data line filter, we want to initialize sessions. And what that will do is, this is actually getting a little bit unwieldy. So I'm going to include a session module, which I need to go here and require that. So let's do that. Okay. And then let's write session.rb. Okay. So we want this to be a module. And then def initialize sessions. You only want to do this once, so we return if sessions are initialized. And basically, what we're going to do is we have a variable that is a hash. And any key that is declared hash key will be declared by default with an empty hash. The reason you need to do this is let's just test this out. So let's say you have h equals hash.new, okay? And you do test. That's just nil now. So there's nothing assigned to it. Whereas if you do h equals hash.new with h key, h.key equals this. Now when you do h test, you get back, hey, the default is a new hash. And then when you say h again, you can see that it's set the default to test. Now, you might see some people say, hey, if you do this, you can just do this, right? The problem with this is that when you do the same thing here, it looks the same, right? But you can see that nothing was assigned. Also, you can see that, let's say, let's add this. Whoopsie. Oh, right, it's a hash, right? And then you look at h, then we look and see, hey, what is in h test? We can see this is a little bit of an odd behavior, right? H looks to be empty, like an empty hash. But if we look at h test, it says, hey, there's stuff in here. And if we do the same thing, but we do, like if we look at hbaz and we look at boo, we can see here, h returns an empty hash. And if we look at h test rather than hbaz, we can see, oh, wait, there's something weird going on. And what's going on is that when we defined our default hash.new empty hash as our default, this is basically copied to every single new argument. It's not duplicated. It's just this is the same array that is being used for every new key. Whereas here, this isn't an assignment. This is more like I'm running this every single time there's a new assignment of a key. It's a bit of an esoteric difference, but yeah, it's there. So we need to do that. let's call this sessions. And then we want to register a report with link connect. And then we need some handler. I'll define that later. And then register another handler for link disconnect. Right. Okay. Let's open filter. And then when you register a report, you get an event and an event handler. And here we just do the simple thing. We just do register stream event, report, event, event handler. And then that's pretty straightforward. Now, I can't really define a new class to pass this handler into this register report, or likewise this link disconnect to this register report, because I need access to this sessions variable. So I'm going to define a new lambda called handle link connect. And right now the signature is payload. And same thing for handle link disconnect. And we'll pass those in. And that's pretty much it. Now, we actually want the session, okay? What we don't want is like, say, our filter here, defined here. We don't want to like say, hey, what's the session? Let's grab the session here with the payload session ID, right? That violates the separation of concerns. Sessions should be handled elsewhere. And then this handler, which is basically a filter, is basically saying, given the constraints of the payload and whatever session is passed in, now I can make decisions based on that and return whatever I need to return. So this is this method signature we're going to use from now on. So we need to actually change that elsewhere. Let's see. In data line, that needs to be session, payload, send filter response, that needs to be session, payload, same thing here. Let's see. Anything else? I mean, if we have an error, we have an error, and we'll fix it when it comes up. So when you handle the link connect event, the report event for link connect, we need to declare a new session. So session equals sessions. Let's see. Oh, we need this session ID. So here's something different. When we handle the link connect event, we want the method signature session and then payload, but we don't actually have a session inside session. So we're just going to pass in session ID. Same thing with link disconnect, I think. That just makes it easier to deal with. So we have session ID, and then we can set session ID equals session ID, and then RDNS equals payload.rdns. And then we can just do the same thing, fcrdns source dest. Okay. And then when we get the disconnect event, we can say sessions.delete session ID. And we don't actually care about this, so let's just put this as star. Okay, if we look at our payloads, let's try this out. Let's print the sessions and see what happens. Okay, we've got an error here. It's under send filter response line 13. Let's try that. Let's look at that. There might be an error. Yeah, okay. When we're passing it into handler, we need to pass in session. So let's go ahead and let's say session equals fetch session with the payload session ID and the payload dot event, because we need that because we have different behavior depending on what event it is. So let's go here. Actually, we haven't defined the session's initialized method yet, so we return back true if the session's variable is not nil. And then fetch session. Let's say def fetch session with the session ID and event will return unless sessions is initialized. And if the event is link connect or link disconnect, we'll just return back session ID, else return back the actual sessions. Now let's see how that works out. Okay, line 30 on here. Oh, whoops. And then the next error is send filter response, line 13, session payload, send filter response. Let's go back here. Oh, yeah, I got the session. Now I need to pass it back in. Okay. We can see that it worked, I think. Filter result with the session and token, and we reject it with 550 no entry. All right. We're getting closer, guys. I think let's clean this up and let's open the data line, I believe. Actually, something that we're missing here is that we've registered the filter for connect, but we haven't registered the data line yet. So that's because all we've done here is register the filter for connecting here. We haven't actually registered any other filters. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's declare a class here. Class rename subject filter. I could use the same lambda form here, but I want to show that you can use different methods to achieve the same thing. So let's say class rename subject filter, and then we just say def call, and then we're passed in some lines. We're passed in some lines, and we want to return lines. And I will get back to this later. For right now, that's what we have. And just as a bit of an explanation, these are the lines that I'm talking about. Well, rather, the lines that start here. So I guess we could do that. Hold on 1 second. So these are the lines that I'm talking about here. So let's see. Let's say filter dot register data line filter. And then we say rename subject dot filter dot new. And then that should print out the correct thing. Oh, we haven't defined data line. Okay. I think all we need to do is data line, and then that should be fine. Okay. Yes. So we have registered the report for link connect. We've registered the report for link disconnect. And then we've also registered the filter for data line. And as you can see here, let's go here to the payloads. When we have a link disconnect, if you remember, go to session. We printed out the sessions. And you can see that we have a session with the session ID session. And then inside that session is this hash with session ID session, RDNS, FCRD, and so on and so forth. So everything looks good. Let's delete this line so that we're not printing it out again. Okay. And then we need to go here. I think this is done. We're declaring data line.build and then passing in the filter and then the right instance. So we need to figure out what to do here. Okay. Until the payload equals dot, this period here, we can't really do anything. So we save this to our session. Let's say lines, and then we do a sort of memoization here to an empty array. And then we just append each line to that array. And then we return. And then after that, once the period is passed in, we skip this block. And then we say, okay, we'll get the lines. And then we pass it into our filter. And we get the modified lines here. And then for each line, we need to send the filter response with the payload session ID and the payload token and then the line. And then we need to do the same thing with the period because we need to end with our own terminating period. If you look here. Yeah, this is what we receive, and this is what we need to respond with. And we need to define that. Def send filter response is the session ID, the token, and the line. And so we print, let's make this a little bit more readable. By putting it in the middle, we print out filter data line, and then a string, and then a string, and then a new line. And that string will be session ID, token, and line. And that should be it. Let me see. Yeah, okay. So as you can see, what we get returned back is basically what was passed in. So if we want to modify this, we go back to our rename subject filter. Basically, we don't want to pass back out what was passed in. We want to do something here. So let's say we need a subject filtered equals false. So we only want to filter the first subject because we know that the headers of a mail message come at the top with the subject usually. And then anything beyond that, we don't care about. So say we do lines.map, do line. And basically what lines.map does is it returns back an array based on the output of this block here. So if I do this, it will basically just spit back out the same thing. If I do this, for every line that was in lines, that line will be replaced with test. And if you see that here, yeah, you can see same number of lines replaced with test. So I don't want that. I want to return back the line unless the line is matched with this simple regex or regular expression. So subject, colon, and then we want to make that case insensitive. And if the subject filtered Boolean is not true. And we do next because if we do return, the way that blocks work is that this return will return out of this call method. And we don't want to do that. We just want to continue with the next line of this array. So we set subject to filtered equals true. And then we return back for this line, subject filtered. We want to say that this subject was filtered, right? And then we need to put the actual subject in, which I think is line 8 ... -1. And then we want to get rid of any white space. Let's test that. So if I have a string, let's say line equals subject test subject, and then I do a line 8 ... -1. Yeah, that gives me everything after the colon. And then once I do lstrip, that will clear out any white space here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's exit out of that, clear, and then we can test this out and see what happens. Yeah, we can see that the subject was indeed filtered, or at least the first subject was, and then the second subject here was not filtered. I think we're pretty much done. All we need to do now is test this with smtpd. Okay, so first let's test the smtpd without the filters. So let's see what happens there. Actually, let me check my mail first. There, okay. So you've seen all this mail before. And then if we do echo subject, test subject, from Jane at example.com. This is a test message. And then we pass that into send mail. Let's say verbose. And then we're passing it to me, Joseph. That looks like that was accepted. So if we go to mxin, we can see our test subject was not filtered because we haven't yet implemented that on smtpd. And then we can see that the message is, this is a test message from Jane at example.com. All right. So let's go ahead and implement. Let's go do it in this window. Let's go ahead and implement that filter in smtpd. So we need to go do as vim etc mail smtpd.conf. So let's define our filter here. Filter subject proc exec. And then the script that we want the filter to run is home Joseph workspace filter subject. And then we want to use the user Joseph and the group Joseph. And let's make this a little bit more readable. Okay. And then, so the thing is, we can put this filter here, but then send mail won't work. And that's because if we go here, let's say man smtpd.conf, we can see that send mail uses listen on socket. And even if this line isn't here, it's still there by default. So we need to add this line here as well. So if you're using send mail and you want to filter your mail, then that's what you need to do here. You need to listen on the socket. Otherwise, if you have a normal mail server, I believe this will work, and we'll test that as well. So we need to restart SMTPD, and then we can send this message again. Oh, we can see now that there was no entry. Yeah, that makes complete sense because let me see. We go here, we remember we had a handler here or a filter on connect that said basically reject everything that comes in. So let's comment that out and then restart the SMTPD server and then do the same thing again. And you can see that it looks like that worked. And if we go check our mail, we can see, yes, the subject was filtered. So that's pretty cool. And we can also test the loopback device or localhost by using telnet. So what we would do there is we would telnet into our localhost on port 25, and then we would type in ehlo localhost, and we get these options, and then we say mail from Jane at example.com, and then we need recipient to Joseph at devbox obsd. Whoops, I think I misspelled that. RCPT to Joseph at devbox obsd. And then that is determined to be valid. And then we can type in data. And then we can just type in our normal message. So we say subject, test, subject. This is a test message. And then we type in period. And then we exit out of that. Oh, wait, quit. That's it. Okay. And then let's check our mail. And we can see that, yep, we have a message. And I forgot to put in the from. So it didn't put that in there. Cool. Now you too can filter mail. If you have any questions for me, be sure to check out my website, josephchoe.com. You might find me on Twitter, GitHub, Reddit, and others of that ilk. See you next time.